What's up, nerds? I'm Alex.
And I'm Danny.
And we're seriously nerdy about a lot of stuff.
And in this video, we are continuing our nerdiness for the late Nickelodeon series Legends of the Hidden Temple.
R.I.P. Olmec.
He's still around. He's in our hearts.
He's still deep in the jungles of...
You may have previously seen the Orange Iguanas conquering Phase 1 of the Legends of the Hidden Temple build. So here's Phase 2.
For this build, we're going to do the green monkeys conquering the pit of the pendulum.
That's the room where you'd knock the pillar over and then hop into the foam.
As you typically did with temples, where you kicked over a pillar.
It's a reference to an Edgar Allan Poe poem. If you haven't seen part 1 of our build and you'd like to know what it is that we're doing, we'll link that here. Without any further ado, let's get to that build.
We kicked off this portion of the temple with templates for the temple. I have every segment of the temple designed in Adobe Illustrator, and I'm able to print out little maps to scale to ensure everything's going to fit together. And when it's complete, it will resemble the little corner indicator from the show that told viewers where the contestants were in the temple. The most important part of this step is just ensuring that everything will line up and that my windows and my doors are all at the appropriate scale so that things will look cohesive.
We learned from part 1 of the temple build that air dry clay contains too much moisture, and epoxy sculpt doesn't really want to adhere to wood, so we ended up sticking with Sculpey and gluing it on with some Sculpey glue.
And like last time, I used foil and sculpting tools to carve directly into the Sculpey clay to create this rock wall, as well as brickwork. Now, because we are seriously nerdy about research, we want each of these temples to have some real-world inspirations, that we have some photos and references to bring this to life in the coolest way possible. For this segment of the temple, we were inspired by Palace 1 at Xlapak in Yucatan, Mexico. It is an old Mayan palace that is recognizable for its vertically stacked stone, so they sort of look like they're standing upright instead of sideways, which is an interesting approach. Palace 1 also has some really interesting architectural details at the tops of the palace, which we tried to capture here as well. I'm using the royal we. Gimlet did not help in architectural research at all. I was about halfway through texturing these bricks on the second side of the wall when I realized I really dislike texturing bricks and clay, so I 3D printed some rollers.
We'll post a link to that 3D file in our description of this video.
The pit of the pendulum was one of my favorite rooms in the original show, because not only did you have to navigate around these ledges to swing into the middle of the room and knock over this pillar that would then trigger doors to open, but if you failed at that, you could just let go of the rope and fall into this cushy foam pit below. So in terms of this build, the only real things we knew we had to have are ledges around the side of the room, some sort of a pit that you would fall into, and a big old column in the middle. Oh, and of course, a swing hanging from the ceiling. There was a lot of 90s kid wish fulfillment happening in this room. Our fantasy reinterpretation of it is going to try to make it a little more realistic to a temple setting, but we want to make sure we had all those elements in place. One thing I learned on this build is to not overbake your Sculpey, but do not fear. I was able to patch a lot of these teeny tiny hairline cracks with a quick mixture of plaster of Paris and Mod Podge, and that not only filled in those little cracks from the overbake, but it also provided a great foundation for the primer.
Normally we would have airbrushed the primer on, as we've done with our past builds, but Danny hates cleaning the airbrush so much that she just did it by hand this time.
It's true, I do. I hate cleaning the airbrush, so I normally ask Alex to do it so that he has to clean it when he's done. But one thing I don't hate doing is dry brushing, because the results are satisfying and also the cleanup is so much easier. So I tried really hard with this build to mirror the same techniques that I used on the first build so that the brickwork looks like it lives in the same world. So it's sort of a back and forth process of dry brushing and then staining and dry brushing and staining. One of the things I learned in the last build was just to pick out some select rocks and stones with different shades of brown, just to break up the same flat color. And although it's not incredibly noticeable in the final build, it does help give a little bit of differentiation.
Maybe it's the scale we're working at or the differentiation from the colors that we did on the bricks, but you can't really tell that we used the roller to produce all of these brick walls.
We took our color palette inspiration from the show itself. So the Pit of the Pendulum Season 3 has these beautiful brick red ledges, as well as borders around some of the squares in the room. And we wanted to make sure we paid homage to that, but also that this felt like a realistic temple that had been sitting around for centuries and had aged naturally over time. I would like to introduce you to my new temple glue gun hack, where I get impatient waiting for things to dry, so I use epoxy sculpt to bind the walls long term and a little bit of hot glue so that it stays in the interim. Epoxy sculpt was a great medium for this because I don't have to bake it and it will allow me to sculpt into it and hide those gaps, but also dry naturally on its own. The main elements of the room are done, except that we didn't really have a pit and we didn't really have a pendulum. So since we couldn't just throw foam bricks on the bottom of an ancient temple floor, we thought maybe vegetation was a good option to break someone's fall. But please don't try this at home. So we suggested some mold on the walls with some green paint and some fine turf on the floor to suggest a soft moss. And then we used our Glowforge to cut these teeny tiny palm leaves out of different shades of green paper that would look like, over time, trees from above had maybe been scattering leaves, and in case of emergency, you could jump down onto a soft bed of palm leaves. Good thing they're monkeys. That's all I'm saying. That is a hard stone floor down there. Gimlet supervised as I placed the leaves, starting with the most dry, tan, and white leaves to the most verdant green leaves to suggest that they'd accumulated over time.
That was the pit, so now it was time to move on to the pendulum.
There was probably a more clever way of making the base of this swing seat, but I couldn't think of it at the time, so I carved a little circle out of balsa wood, and then I used the same technique that I used for rope on the last build, where you use an electric drill to rotate two wires together to create some pretty convincing rope. The best part about this is that the rope stays exactly where you place it, and you don't have to worry about it swaying in the breeze. I used the same style of wood beams and even the same paint colors as I did in the first room, just so this room looks like it's a natural extension and there's a little bit of cohesion. And while I had my paint palette out, I used some different shades of yellow and green just to give the pit of the palm leaves below a little bit of variety. After that, I broke out my balsa wood beams to frame out the exterior and give it a finished edge. Like its neighbor next door, this room has also started to be taken over by vines, which is such a satisfying way to make something look abandoned and ancient. The pit of the pendulum was nearly complete, but a couple finishing touches would really put it over the edge. So I used some shade on the rope, some dry brushing on the beams, and a couple highlights on the edge of the pendulum itself, before turning my attention to the outside and painting these balsa wood beams with a coat of black 3.0 so that everything looks nice and sharp. But, you know, all of this painting can be a little bit tedious, so I decided to just speed it up.
We used Hero Forge to design a couple of monkey folk for the green monkeys, and then 3D printed them on a resin printer. After airbrushing a coat of black primer, I then started to paint the arms and legs using tiny strokes to suggest the nap of the fur. We decided to use squirrel monkeys as the source material for these monkeys because they are native to South America. I also think it's probably because Danny really likes squirrels, but don't tell her I said that. To paint the first monkey, I went ahead and used one of my normal brushes, but when I moved to the second monkey, I ended up using one of our nail art brushes, and boy howdy, what an incredible difference it makes. The level of detail is just so much finer than I get with my normal brush. Do you see these tiny, fine strokes that I'm making? I've never done that before, and it makes me so mad. I must have spent $60 or more looking for the perfect brush to do fine details, and it turns out that it's always been sitting in my lap. Just nail art brushes. Once I had the monkeys all fully painted, it was time to hand it off to Danny to go ahead and paint the beautiful insignias onto their t-shirts.
While I put the finishing touches on Alex's adorable squirrel monkeys, here are some fun facts. Number 1. Did you know that a group of South American squirrel monkeys is sometimes referred to as a cartload? Yeah, a cartload of squirrel monkeys. Fun fact number 2. The green monkeys, as a team, are tied with the silver snakes for most wins in the history of the temple run. They both have 8. So naturally, our last step in the build is to place this cartload of winners in their final spots.
We did it! This was a fun part 2 in a series. We were definitely able to take the things we learned in the first one and apply them to the second one, but it was not without hiccups. We knew to just use Sculpey clay on this build, and I was feeling very confident about that. And then I overbaked it and it cracked. So by build number 7, we're gonna have this down pat.
So Danny figured out recently that you can just get nail art brushes to do really fine details. That's what I used for these minis. It is infinitely better than the fancy brushes that I actually bought for detail painting.
Thanks, manicurists of the world. So this was the first time on a seriously nerdy project that we've had the Glowforge, and to be able to cut those incredibly detailed palm leaves was so satisfying. We were saving money and making something that was exactly the size and scale and color we needed. Super cool.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I know we'd change our style around a little bit lately just to see what works. If you have any thoughts or feelings about it, feel free to share them in the comments. We got some exciting builds coming up. We hope you stay tuned. And now, the final footage. Knocking over the pendulum and opening the Chamber of Secrets.
Nope.
Then you have to fight the basilisk. No notes.
Help.
Nothing but net.
Could you pound on my neck? I'm a television star. This is the normal proportions for the stereotypical masculine feminine figures.
I just appreciate whatever architect was like, here's the way to get to the next room. Destroy one of the supports.
But don't worry, if you can't do it, I've cushioned your fall. Giving Dad pointers on painting figures.
This is our assistant.
Say hi. He's a barracuda.
I think I'm a blue barracuda. Don't trust me if I said something contradictory in our last
He's
video.
gonna say it in every video. He's gonna change teams.